Over thousands of years, man has seen the sun rise over these prehistoric meadows. Stone Age, Roman and Saxon. They all trod these marshy leas and looked up in awe at the rising yellow ball in the sky. This misty sunrise over the River Itchen in Hampshire has not changed for centuries. I filmed this in May 2004, and by the high definition quality of today, these 10-year-old images look outmoded and ill-defined. Nevertheless, they do capture the breathtaking vistas of daybreak over this celebrated valley. The southern chalk streams, where the dry fly and the nymph were rehearsed, developed and finally given to the world of fly fishing in the early years of the 20th century. Just what is a chalk stream, and why are they so important to fly fishing around the world? To find the true origins of the chalk rivers of southern England, we have to travel back in time somewhere between 70 and 90 million years. This was the latter half of the Cretaceous period. Countless trillions of bivalves, ammonites and minute marine creatures, which together with the skeletal parts of the decomposing coccoliths became compressed to form vast deposits of chalk, a material consisting almost entirely of calcium carbonate. The Cretaceous period ended about 65 million years ago, bringing to a close the Mesozoic era, an epoch that also saw the demise of the dinosaur. This section of geological time was marked by a recession of the sea, leaving large outcrops of the younger chalk, some of which were 1,600 feet deep. Water levels failed to rise to a depth which would again submerge the upper chalk. Precipitation, particularly in winter, soaks through the thin layer of topsoil to be absorbed and held within the cool depths of the porous chalk. This subterranean region of saturated chalk is known as the aquifer. Rainwater soaking into the chalk gathers goodness as it slowly percolates through this underground filter. The water, now nutrient rich, emerges via multiple springs lower down the catchment many months later and helps breathe life into these abundant alkaline rivers. Their rich ecosystems thrive in the pure, life-giving water. In southern England, a series of glacial ages began a little over 500,000 years ago. Even now, we exist within a glacial transition. It was a time of great climactic oscillation. This caused a rise and fall in sea levels, which was responsible for the downfall of the supposed Solent River system. Sea levels rose by about 45 metres 8,000 years ago. The Hampshire rivers and streams were once tributaries, as were those of Dorset and Wiltshire, of the ancient Solent River, which flowed eastwards from its source in Dorset from what we know today as the River Frome, joining the sea somewhere near Littlehampton, way to the east of the Isle of Wight, which was then part of the mainland. Formed more than 230,000 years ago, the Solent River would have been disrupted numerous times due to a rise and fall in sea level. During the Iron Age, more and more land was cleared of trees, then settled, ploughed and grazed. Growing wheat was the foundation of farming policy. The grain was ground painfully by hand. The principle of grinding grain between a stationary and a revolving stone was a highly significant development, and perhaps had occurred before the first Roman citizen had set foot in Hampshire in AD 43. Roman Hampshire provided ideal conditions for the installation of watermills. Before they departed, it is likely they would have engineered numerous mill sites that still exist today. In the Domesday Book, over 300 mills were recorded in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight 20 years after the Norman conquest. Also, it is possible that the Romans introduced some form of fly fishing from Macedonia. There was a further development to these damp, agriculturally poor chalk valleys. They had been converted to water meadows, using a complex system of weirs and hatches that led water away from the main streams to the centre of the meadows. It flowed in a continuous sheet across the grass and was collected by a complementary set of weirs and drains that directed the water back into the main streams lower down. These systems were managed for the farmer by meadsmen or drowners, borne in the water from the river a supply of rich nutrients. During the water's journey across the meadows, these abundant nutrients were absorbed into the turf. It provided an early bite of lush grass for the grazing sheep and cattle. The water meadows were the single most substantial factor which formed the Test Itchen valleys and the other chalk vales of the South Country. It established a biological ecosystem distinctively rich and very specialised. From the beginning of the 19th century to its midpoint, angling with the fly underwent a transformation. The 10 years covered by the fishing diary of the Reverend Richard Durnford paint a picture of a very quaint country pursuit, with little or no effort to manage the river as a fishery. Compare this with the more ordered fisheries of 50 years later. It can be seen that a revolution had taken place. Fly fishing had come of age, the intellectuals had moved in. Hampshire was the place to be, and the clear chalk streams began to attract affluent country gentlemen and rich city gents, who for the price of a return train ticket from London could be on the stream within an hour or two of leaving the smoke, and be back in time for work on a Monday morning. Into the early years of the 20th century, there followed a phase where enthusiasm for this new art form of exact imitation and the dry fly school became an obsession for these dry fly purists. It took the logical, legal mind of G.E.M. Skews and 20 years to calm the extremes of these piscatorial dogmatists. Skews bequeathed to fly fishing a balanced philosophy of dry fly fishing coupled to a righteous and wholly principled means of imitating the subsurface insect. These iconic chalk streams, where the dry fly was rehearsed and finally given its command performance, were spoken of in almost hushed tones by the bucolics who fished them. The dry fly pioneers were an extraordinary band of wealthy, dedicated fly fishermen. The Victorian fly fishing country gentleman's leisure time was long, but they were not idle. What number of individuals can be classed as the modern dry fly pioneers? My research has lifted the veil which hitherto had obscured a triumvirate, 3 significant minds in this developmental epic. One was angling editor of the then weekly country sport newspaper, The Field. The second, a schoolmaster at Bristol's Clifton College, while the third, an ex-cavalry officer and country gentleman. They, as boys, started fly fishing with the downstream wet fly. Francis, Henry Sinclair Hall, and arguably the greatest fly fisher of them all, George Selwyn Marryat. They were the real pioneers of what we identify today as the chalk stream dry fly. Marryat, and I make no apology for this, he is my all-time hero. Although I have been researching his life and times for over 20 years now, and know more of him than anybody alive, I still know relatively little of the man himself. What was he really like? Could we have been friends even? As a passionate chalk stream fly fisher, I am always very conscious of the gift he has left us with, and feel very privileged to have cast my dry flies and caught numerous large brown trout on many of the same hallowed chalk stream reaches he loved to cast his dry flies on. And to think I fish in exactly the same way he determined all those decades ago. He made the history. If we could travel back in time to the later years of the 19th century, we would find the chalk streams very different. The volume of water was more than 3 or 4 times that of today. The River Test in the 21st century suffers from low water levels, and some reaches are heavily overgrown with trees and vegetation and largely unfishable. Whereas looking at these old photographs from over 100 years ago, the river is brim full, and her banks and water meadows were only lightly treed and bushed. It is a delight to amble in this lush Hampshire countryside. This pretty lane, full of birdsong, leads on to the sheep bridge, connecting an ancient drover's route over the River Test. A quiet country walk turned into something quite different on this bright morning in early June. This is a captivating place for me at this time of year. The mayfly is up and the fish are slurping them down greedily. There is magic in the air. Do you know, standing here on the sheep bridge, arguably the most famous landmark on the River Test, one cannot help feel something of the atmosphere that pervades this hallowed place. I feel Marryat's spirit every time I am here. This photograph from 1893 of him with 3 of his fishing companions is so evocative of the time. They are all looking to Marryat. They seem to be having an engaging discussion over their tobacco pipes. Presumably, one would think, about the dry fly. Marryat on the left is discussing with Nat Lloyd, third from the left, the size of a trout one of them has caught. Note the fisherman's telltale way of holding their 2 index fingers apart to denote the size of a fish, either real or imaginary. No, I'm telling you, it was this big. 5 generations ago, fly fishing history was being made here. Dry fly fishing spread from this tranquil place to faraway places all over the world, where trout and grayling like to sip insects from the surface of bright, clear streams. I have little difficulty in imagining myself back in the not too distant past, when the great dry fly revolution was unfolding within the Test Valley. The trees shiver on a morning that is windless. Who might this be appearing out of the pale morning sun? Drifting across the bridge, the spectre hastens towards me. I stand very still. The air around me is calm. I turn and face whatever it is. The hairs on my neck stand erect. Goosebumps shiver up and down my spine. I feel rooted to the spot. My eyes shadow the apparition. It appears to float down the bank. I hope, just hope, to glimpse the master at work. Alas, all I find is just trampled rushes and crushed grass, where someone has knelt down to stalk a fish. Could it have been he returned to fish his old haunts? I like to think it was. Flights of fancy, perhaps. This place is so steeped in fly fishing folklore, you'd have to be quite insensitive not to detect the mood that permeates this historic site. Might I have felt a tap on the shoulder? Come on, snap out of it. Time to get back to the car. With a wistful glance over my shoulder and with thoughts of the next time I wander back. The ghosts or figments of my imagination tease me like this every time I am fortunate to be by this bewitching Hampshire stream. Over 20 years ago, I became fascinated by the life of George Selwyn Marryat. But what of all the other men who were active about the chalk streams more than 100 years ago? If only we knew more. It was this dry fly fascination, coupled with such a celebrated if shadowy figure, and my extensive research uncovering the existence of a fly box once belonging to Marryat, spurred me on to find out more. In 1923, Skews had the foresight to ask a question. Might Marryat have used a fly box for his chalkstream dry flies? Marryat also used a fly book. This fly book passed from Marryat to his good friend Basil Field, thrice president of the Fly Fishers Club of London. I have proved the fly box exists. It has been passed down by Marryat's descendants and is now in my care. At this time of intense discovery, I was thrilled to be invited to lunch with John Francis at his home in Hampshire. This delightful man allowed me the rare opportunity to video and photograph fishing equipment once belonging to his grandfather, Francis Francis. Among these precious artefacts are his fly books and fly boxes. They would have been very familiar to George Marryat. All of the Francis fly books contain flies dressed on hooks to gut, designed mainly to be fished wet. His fly boxes, however, only contain flies dressed on eyed hooks for dry fly fishing, although the dressing methods predate the patterns found in Marryat's box. The construction methods of the boxes were primitive compared to the Marryat box. The significance of the time is using a fly box at all, and with separate compartments. This avoids crushing the delicate, new chalkstream dry flies. They would be damaged if kept flat within the pages of a fly book. Marryat's fly box predates other fly boxes made by Wheatley's, Hardy Brothers and Farlow's. The box and its contents date from before Halford's first book in 1886. Richard Wheatley have manufactured quality fly boxes for over 100 years. Their first box, to be made from pressed aluminium alloy with spring-loaded lids, was on the market in 1908. Marryat's box also has spring-loaded lids and predates the Wheatley boxes by 3 decades. His descendants are sure that he actually made the box himself, or at least I think had it made to his exact specifications by a skilled engineer in Salisbury. Marryat had moved there late in 1885. Along with his good friend Dr. Thomas Sanctuary Jr., they found premises for a fishing tackle manufacturer from Failsworth near Manchester, who was moving south. This was George Holland. He became very important in the commercial development of the dry fly, and was taught by Marryat to dress the new dry fly patterns from Halford's groundbreaking new book. Sanctuary has told us that Marryat had largely given up tying his own flies by 1886, preferring to get them from Holland, who employed a team of ladies to manufacture these flies in commercial quantities at his Bridge Street Emporium. My strongly held view is that Marryat's newfound associate had a hand in the making of this new and sophisticated fly box. When Marryat's close friend Basil Field died in December 1908, the fly book passed to James Rolt KC. Skews gained permission from Rolt to review the contents of the portmanteau, as it was called. Held within its pages were over 800 flies dressed on eyed hooks. but almost all of them had been dressed to fish wet. Skews was very perceptive when he concluded this review with the following: "There may, however, be members of the Fly Fishers Club or others who occasionally or possibly frequently fished with Marryat in those great days, and it would be of immense interest to angling history if any of them would recall for the benefit of posterity whether Marryat continued to rely on the book under review to the end, or whether he latterly carried a fly box for chalk stream and used the book, the portmanteau, for rough water fishing of other rivers." When Skews wrote his review of the Marryat fly book in the Fly Fishers Club Journal in the autumn 1923 issue, he was very conscious that before recent history became ancient history, he could do something to record the details of a valuable artefact for future generations. I now do the same with my discovery of the fly box. The box is astonishing, not only for its unique pre-Wheatley spring-loaded construction. It was the contents that made my heart skip a beat the first time I had the opportunity to see inside. There are 178 dry flies held within its 48 compartments.
Have you seen a fly tied by Marryat?
No, but he's apparently got some.
Well, yeah.
I'd like to see some of
The most
Little Marryat.
fantastic bit of fly tying you've ever seen.
I'd like to see an original Little Marryat.
And I tell you what, the weird thing about it was, because the first time I saw him, you suddenly realise you're actually looking at the authentic thing.
Yeah.
Because suddenly realised the fly was finished off behind the wing and hackle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, nobody else did that.
Absolutely.
And it suddenly it brought it home to me. Christ, this is it.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Absolutely magic the way they were
Yeah.
tied.
I remember you saying to me when we were in the Bugle in Botley that Saturday evening,
Yeah.
someone's just walked over my grave.
I had a real shiver go down my spine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the small ones were so beautifully tied, it was unbelievable. You know, it
Doubles floated out.
beautiful flies.
They are all classic versions of chalkstream dry flies from the time Marryat and Halford were working on their first two books, and span a period from the early 1880s into the middle years of the 1890s. All expertly dressed, tiny triple-O double-dressed split-winged ginger quills tied by Marryat with the flies finished off at the shoulder behind the wing and hackle. In the early 1880s, this was a Marryat trademark, which he described in a letter to H.S. Hall in November 1882. "My dear Hall, a slack morning, and the spirit moves me to discuss a new winging for eyed hooks. I have not practised it long enough to say that it is quicker than the old. I certainly think it is better." Marryat then goes into great detail about his new winging method. "Now, take two right wing feathers corresponding to the same two left wing feathers, which take also. Cut them down the sides of the quill till you have 4 bands of fibre, thus. Place 1 on 2 and 3 on 4, so that the points coincide all down as 4, 5. Now lay 4 on 5 with points all coinciding. Then take a pair of long-jawed bulldog forceps. Weiss and Sons made me 2 pairs, and will have the pattern, and grip the whole lot thus." This is significant. He was commissioning ingenious labour-saving new equipment to facilitate his revolutionary dry fly work. It is easy to conclude he also added the construction of the fly box to this list of special commissions. Marryat continues with his explanation to H.S. Hall about his new winging technique. "Shift the whole lot each time you want to wing a fly, till enough for 1 pair of wings is clear of the jaws of the forceps. Take them between left finger and thumb, and they come away in perfect condition without breaking the fibre. Now take them on 4 turns of silk on the bare hook, close to the eye. Adjust the wings to the right length and tie down the old way. Half hitch. Now draw the refuse fibre down and back, half on each side of the hook, and tie down behind the wings along the hook. Snip the balance to the usual taper. Put the hackle on hard up to wings, tie down and go to the tail, tie in whisks, and bring your quill or whatnot back from the tail to head till close to the hackle, and tie in this and finish with the whip finish at the shoulder. I like the look of the fly enclosed as any tie I ever saw. The wings stand up well, not too forward, they can't draw, there is no bother. The eye is clear and the taper of the body can be managed with comfort and satisfaction. I have only tied half a dozen this way and think it is a good way. The difficulty is to get the refuse back tight and neat from the head, but it is a matter of a little practice, I think. Of course, one could tie a rougher fly quicker. That would kill just as well. We know that, but it would not gold medalise a man in a crowd. I'm off to Cornwall on Wednesday to frighten the erratic snipe. Yours truly, George Marryat. Marryat only rarely courted publicity, and yet, at the time, he was at the forefront of dry fly development. It is in the words of his friends' tributes to him, and in the minimal private correspondence that have survived the years, where we find the true origins to all his knowledge and accomplishments. The originality of thought to speed up the winging of the new dry flies by the use of the bulldog forceps. George Edward Mackenzie Skews, writing in 1923, even mentioned seeing the forceps in action on a visit to George Holland's Emporium. I recall seeing, years ago, the girls in Geo Holland's tying room winging hooks with extraordinary speed by means of this method. Francis called some of these tiny O dry flies brown duns. The floating flies in the box are O's, O's and single O's. They are dressed on the up-eyed Snecky Limerick hook that at the time Marryat was assessing for H.S. Hall. They would soon be on sale at all good tackle shops. Marryat's description of a good hook was the temper of an angel and the penetration of a prophet, fine enough to be invisible and strong enough to kill a bull in a 10-acre field. There are original little Marryats with dubbed bodies made from the opossum fur he brought back from Australia in the early 1870s. This is the badger-hackled detached red spinner, and is so evocative of those long summer evening rises. The detached body is so transparent. This fly is similar to Halford's signature fly, the detached badger. That was also his cognomen for all the articles he wrote for the Field and Fishing Gazette. Marryat's famous blue dun dressing, of which he says this: the quill dyed olive with onion dye, and a blue dun hackle dyed in the same dye in 3 shades and sizes, no fisherman should ever be without. I should not be afraid to back it against any other flies that can be tied. To dry fly men, this fly is infamous. It started slowly and led to a lengthy altercation with the dry fly purists. The pink wickham was the pattern Skews used in the spring of 1888 when he hooked a fish in a hatch hole on the Abbots Barton water of the River Itchen. By today's standards it was a small fish, but it broke him. This example of the pink wickham, being from Marryat's box and over 125 years old, the bright gold body and rib are somewhat tarnished. Skews, fishing the same hatch hole 2 days later and with the same pattern, hooked a pretty trout, a trifle over 1 pound in weight, takeable in those days. It turned out to be the same fish, with the original fly attached to the point of fine drawn silkworm gut embedded in its jaw. Upon looking, Skews found the fish had a number of tiny pea-green creatures in its mouth, which he later learnt were nymphs. The rest, as they say, is history. Fly fishers who have fished the chalk streams over the years will have, I am sure, heard the name Halford in connection with the dry fly. Frederick Michael Halford, a successful and wealthy retired businessman, wrote the first definitive books on the art of dry fly fishing on the limpid watercourses of the South Country. How did he arrive at his conclusions? Sadly, his books will not help us. We have to look beyond the pages. Halford openly admitted that he was the pupil and Marryat his teacher, and relied heavily on his skill and expertise. M, as his intimate friends called him, was acknowledged as the very best of the best dry fly practitioner on the chalk streams in the 1870s, 80s and 1890s. He was reaching the pinnacle of his many skills and full of vigour. Without warning, he died suddenly after a short illness. We lost to fly fishing an innovator unmatched for originality of thought amongst fly fishers. He was only 56. Influenza was rampant 118 years ago, even to the fittest of men. Until November 1995, it was generally accepted Marryat had been laid to rest in Winchester Cathedral. During the course of my research, I discovered that previous authors had been mistaken. The inaccurate information had passed from old book to new book, and so on and so forth. These writers had failed to put in the legwork to find the truth. They had confused the Francis Memorial at Winchester for Marryat's final resting place. Armed with the correct location, my wife and I set out to substantiate the information I had to hand. One day in November 1995, we arranged a rendezvous with the verger of Salisbury Cathedral. Marryat's mortal remains had been cremated, so I already knew there would be no gravesite. There in the cloisters, under the canopy of the cedar trees, we set about finding the only remembrance we have of this prince of fly fishers. I found it, digging down on my knees with my hands. After an hour or more of searching, a simple marble tablet materialised. The centenary of his sudden death was only a few months away, and so 100 years later, to the very day, 14th February 1996, I returned to the cloisters to pay my respects at his passing, with a simple laurel leaf circlet enveloping his plaque. His fly fishing companions and friends paid tribute to his memory. William Senior, otherwise known as Red Spinner of the Field, Major Turl of Knot fame, Major Carlyle, southwest of the field, H.S. Hall, and R.B. Marston, who, as owner and editor of the Fishing Gazette, devoted 4 pages of reminiscence. These pieces were thousands of words long, and they are remarkable in that they, at last, give us a deeper understanding of just how skillful he was, and of a life well lived. That day, so long gone, we lost a dear fellow of so many parts. Skillful entomologist and photographer, expert with the microscope and the study of what he called the teleology of the infinite, a true country sportsman, gifted horseman, and with gun or rod he was much sought after as a house guest at many a grand country house party. To stand at the butts he was a crack shot, or to stalk the chalk river banks for their lusty brown trout. All this he relished, but only if his companions were known to him. He would not be totted out for the edification of strangers. Within the company of his chums, however, Marryat could be the life and soul of the party. At the heart of the Marryat power was this ability to cast a fly with uncanny accuracy. Casting and presentational skill, with the selection of the right artificial that matched the fly the trout were feeding on, this was the Marryat code. although he did sometimes call himself an old duffer. Said with tongue in cheek, I have no doubt. Exact imitation of the natural fly was at the heart of this quest to provide the Victorian fly fishermen with a comprehensive model on which they could use as the benchmark for their own efforts on the stream. The entomology of the chalk streams, the myriad numbers of Ephemeroptera, Trichoptera, Diptera and Plecoptera. This is what Halford set out to do, the all-embracing study of the fly fisher's natural insects, with Marryat as his guiding light. And starting in the early months of 1879, they set to work. In the meantime, M had to teach H how to properly tie a Marryat invention, the double-dressed, split-winged, chalkstream dry fly. Halford was to learn quickly. By the spring of 1880, Halford had rented rooms at Houghton Mill, hard by the River Test, their outdoor laboratory. Halford, it has been said, kept open house for his fishing acquaintances, for this was a small, tight-knit circle of like-minded gentlemen. They spent many glorious summers fishing in each other's company, but all working towards this impossible common goal, the perfect imitation of the natural insect. Here, in these first floor rooms at the mill, long into the night by candlelight, everyone else would be abed, H and M would write up their daily notes. It was to be nearly 6 years before the first book was finished, Floating Flies and How to Dress Them, published in 1886. This one book, and the one that followed in 1889, Dry Fly Fishing in Theory and Practice, revolutionised chalkstream fly fishing tradition for all time. Halford would not commit anything to paper until he had proved it to himself to be beyond reasonable doubt, and only then after Marryat had authorised it for print. This leather-bound deluxe copy is a very special one. It is the actual book Halford inscribed and presented to Marryat. This title has the famous printed tribute to GSM from his grateful pupil. Halford very warmly signed it to his dear friend. This book has come to me from Marryat's great-grandson. There is one other book from the same source existing from Marryat's library, a leather-bound deluxe copy of Making a Fishery. This is Halford's attempt to chronicle their efforts to transform the Ramsbury Manor fishery on the River Kennet into classic dry fly water. After the end of the Houghton Fly Fishing Club, Halford needed to find new water. This book is also inscribed. Look at the date, just 2 months before Marryat went to that great chalk stream in the sky. These are the only books that remain from his collection. To have been a fly on the wall of the sitting room at the mill, what stories the old place could tell. Dinner over, their pipes burning, whisky and port flowing, it was a hotbed of fervent discussion about hackle, feather and fur, and how best to marry them together. In the early 1880s, this was the epicentre of the embryonic but definitive chalkstream dry fly, although it had not yet hatched. The mill became the unofficial headquarters for the exclusive club this group of gentlemen belonged to, the Houghton Fly Fishing Club, not to be confused with the club in Stockbridge that is called to this day the Houghton Fishing Club. In 1874, Dr. Wickham, of Wickham's Fancy fame, took on the lease of over 3 miles of the choicest part of the River Test, based around the village of Houghton. At the time, this was amongst the finest trout water in the country. Dr. Wickham formed a club. This private club was made up of 20 members, and amongst them were this close-knit circle of fly fishing innovators. The club water, known as Wickham's, welcomed many guests. Francis, legendary angling editor of the Field, was an associate member and came down to fish when he could, putting up at the mill, a welcome guest of Halford's. Francis enjoyed his last day casting for autumn grayling on Wickham's in October 1886. It was the last time he picked up a fishing rod, as failing health saw that he no longer had the strength to continue with his passion. He passed away peacefully in his sleep on Christmas Eve 1886. He was 67, very sadly mourned by many. William Senior picked up the rod as angling editor at the Field. Both Francis and Senior chronicled the doings of the club with delightful editorials and encouraged members to submit articles and letters. The club's honorary secretary, Major Anthony Carlyle, became more well known with the byline Southwest. He wrote many intimate articles about the club and the fishing, never mentioning members by name, of course. Victorian social etiquette required that privacy could not be invaded. Just the odd initial here and there. They are a charming insight into this fraternity of fly fishers. Even Marryat, not one usually to put pen to paper publicly in reply to a Francis editorial in the Field, Christmas 1880. This was a 3,000-word tour de force on winter grayling fishing on the River Itchen, where he leased the fishing with Marryat. January 1881, an 800-word insightful reply called Quill Bodies for Flies was penned by the maestro. It gives us just a glimpse into the mists that have surrounded this gifted man. It was all about his techniques and methods for dyeing fly dressing materials and his tying of an artificial fly that Francis called a brown dun. Marryat had given him 3. They were fishing together, and these little size 17 flies, dressed on the new up-eyed Snecky Limerick hooks, proved to be very effective on the Itchen grayling that winter. In the same issue of the Field as Marryat's piece, and on the same page, Halford had filed his first dispatch, called Grayling Fishing in the Test. He went on to write many letters and articles for the Field under his byline of Detached Badger. The little hut on the Sheepbridge shallows, long since rotted away, was the site where Marryat first got to spend time with Halford in the early spring of 1879. This is where their long and intimate friendship began. That day, all those years ago, brought a howling northeasterly gale with snow and hail. No one ventured out with rod, but over a dram or two, a long discussion developed inside the shelter about Halford's admitted lack of fly dressing skill. Marryat resolved to help in any way he could. This momentous day, a meeting of minds, has passed into chalkstream legend. 18 halcyon seasons flitted by at glorious Testside, with many joyous gatherings at the mill and upstream by the little thatched fishing hut on the Sheepbridge shallows. Wickham retained the lease until the end of 1892. It was a dreadful end of a celebrated club. History was created here. In this modern age, that has largely been forgotten. The demise of the club was much lamented by readers and contributors alike in the Field and Fishing Gazette. Many articles and letters penned by members recalling happy days and memories spent by the river appeared in the weeks and months before and after the club's last day. The Stockbridge Club regained the lease they had lost in 1873. They had changed their name to the Stockbridge Fishing Association during this period, reverting back to their original name, the Houghton Fishing Club, after regaining the lease for the start of the 1893 season. Without the pioneering work undertaken by Marryat and Halford and their close associates while members of the now defunct Houghton Fly Fishing Club, it is extremely doubtful fly fishing would be where we find it in the 21st century. This story shall the good man teach his son, from this day to the end of the world, but we in it shall be remembered, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here. The fishery, as the crow flew, was about 2.5 miles, but given the twists and turns, side streams and carriers, it was considerably more. A part of the fishery was known as the Half-Water. The opposite bank was foreign territory to the club. The top boundary was from Machine Barn Shallows, 1/2 mile below Stockbridge, all the way down to the mill. The club water was known as Upper and Lower, but in communication with each other by crossing neutral ground with permission. Dr. Wickham purchased the manorial fishing rights in 1873, and by 1875 had proposed dividing the purchase into shares of £250 each. A shareholder would be given perpetual rights to fish the acquired water. However, this did not find favour. Wickham then resolved to form a club. A non-secretary, Major Carlyle, was appointed and rules drawn up. Membership was fixed at 20. The fishing was entirely restricted to fly fishing and with no rod sharing. An annual subscription of £20 was levied, and there were 6-day tickets issued to each member for their guests. The club, in its early days, was not usually up to full strength. There was at most no more than 4 or 5 rods on the water the same day. So long as there is a good head of sizable trout, dry fly fishermen do not need a great extent of water. A short distance from the lowest point of the fishery was another branch of the Test called Black Lake, also an appendage of the club. Sluggish, deep and full of mud beds, but held some good trout. This short length was one of Marryat's favourite spots on the fishery. Size limit for trout was set at 12 inches, later increased to 13 and 14 inches, according to where they were caught. In the upper or lower water, to start with, the opening date was set at March the 15th. Later, in 1878, it was amended to March the 25th. This was still too early. April the 2nd finally opened the season until the closing of the club. Even that date was seen as still too early for the Test 3-pounders, not yet fully recovered from the rigours of spawning the previous December. The trout would not fully recover until they had feasted on the granum later in April, and the mayfly, depending on the weather, would be up sometime in May and early June. At the inception of the club, fewer than half the members of Wickham's knew anything of dry fly fishing. The other, older members were still fishing with a team of 2 or 3 wet flies downstream, while the opposite bank of the Half-Water still fished the wet fly and the blowline, and it seemed they were to stay ignorant of the developing dry fly revolution on the other side of the stream until well into the 1890s. Here, on the celebrated River Test in Hampshire, I am fishing at Wherwell Priory, at the invitation of my fishing chum, Ray Weiss. Ray hails from Grafton, Wisconsin, way across the big pond. This stretch of the River Test at Wherwell has a large head of sizable brown trout, both wild and introduced. These 2 September days in 2007 and 2009 were extraordinary for the number of fish that fancied our tiny artificial nymphs were quite good enough to eat. They were bright sunny days and not a lot of natural fly in the water to bring the fish up. Only one fish was actively feeding on top, and that wouldn't take the sunk nymph. I threw a size 16 floating CDC emerger to it. It turned out to be a very pretty wild brownie that took first chuck. Happy days indeed. Here's how it unfolded. Got it. Wonderful. He looked at it once and I dropped it back over him and he took it. So I tried him with the sunk nymph. but he only just glanced at it a couple of times, but he wouldn't take it. Dropped a dry fly emerger on him, and he took it as soon as he was happy with it. Super. Super duper. Make sure I've got wet hands. He's bitten the net. Come on, don't bite the net. And the fly's out already, being barbless. Fly's caught in the net. Isn't that lovely? Haha. About £1.75, just under £2. Super. Look at the colours of the fins. Lovely buttery gold on the belly. Super fish. Lovely. Let's put him back. He's gone straight away. It's always nice to catch a fish on a dry fly because it's all visual. You can see everything. It's like a goldfish bowl. The water's so clear. We've had a fair good hatch of small fly this morning, and there's been quite a few fish active at the surface. So you couldn't really ask for more. It's down to us now to catch the fish, which Ray's had a couple. I've had one and lost it, and I've just had that lovely fish on a dry fly. Excellent. Ray and I have fished together in many faraway places, fly fishing the warm saltwater shallow flats off tropical islands in the Caribbean for bonefish and permit.
Simon, I'm one of your fans. You're a great guy.
What would you do with this guy, honestly? And returning again and again to the famous and historic chalk streams of southern England, and thrown flies together on his local streams and lakes in his home state for brown trout and bass, both largemouth and smallmouth. It goes without saying, Ray is an accomplished fly fisher. It is always a great pleasure to film our fishing adventures, and every time great fun fishing with him. This is Ray's first time on the river, and that's his first smallmouth bass this season. That was
And that was a good one. As
a good 5 or 6 minutes.
This was great. I'm glad we chose to do it, that you were interested in doing it, because
we actually made the effort to go out and do it.
I couldn't guarantee anything. You just got to try.
Absolutely.
And with the pressure of time here, that corner there, that dead water actually goes back in. You can see the trees here and then the trees in the background. There's quite a lot of water in there right now. We had a bit more time
to have worked our way back up in there.
It's quite mucky back in there.
Is it? Yeah.
There's no river channel coming through there.
Oh, so that's basically
a dead end.
That's a dead end, yeah. Okay.
But early in the season there's bass and there's northerns in there too sometimes, because the water is considerably warmer back in there than it is in the stream.
Yeah.
And the bass didn't fight quite as much as they usually do. Mine jumped once or twice.
Sure.
I don't know if yours jumped at all.
Almost.
It's kind of wallowed.
Yeah, a little bit,
Yeah, because normally they come out of the water like corks. Not all the time.
Sure.
I mean, it's like the trout. They come,
absolutely. Some
jump,
do, some don't.
don't.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Thanks for letting me come down.
Well, that's the first 2 days here. This is what we're going to be doing for 4 or 6 hours, whatever we wanted a day.
Yeah.
And the weather just skunked us.
Just good. The 4 days we've been up on the driftless, it's just given it enough time just to make it fishable.
Yep.
That's great.
And there's more insects here than on the... Did you see the sulfurs going on?
Yeah, the sulfurs coming on.
Look at the air. There's bugs everywhere.
Hey, let's go and wash up for supper.
Yeah, let's do that.
Come on then. Fly fishing has taken me to some breathtaking locations around the world, but it is always the chalk streams I return to. At Wherwell Priory on the River Test in Hampshire, fishing with tiny imitations of the ephemerid nymphs the fish love to feed on, is a pleasing challenge to get right. It is an exquisite experience deceiving a big old wily brown trout with a tiny dry fly. It is, I think, one of the purest forms of angling. Nice to catch some fish on a dry fly before the season finishes at the end of September. Right, let's see whether I can do this little CDC emerger justice. Now the fish is just the other side where the fly landed. We've got lots of different currents here, and the enemy of the dry fly fisher is drag. Got it. So we've got to try and keep the fish clear of the wind. It's a powerful hook. The fish is covered himself in weed. Hopefully, with a little coaxing, we can get the fish in the net. Here it comes. So unfortunate because it enables us to get the fish in the net a little bit quicker. Oh, the fish is ours. That is a heavy fish. Superb. Not far short of 4 pounds. And we're going to try and put this fish back without falling in. Superb. There is, however, one other pure form of deceiving chalk stream trout, and that is below the surface with a weighted nymph. What follows is a fruitful escapade with the nymph on the historic Test. Chalk stream nymphing techniques are always undertaken by fishing upstream, never downstream. It goes against all good sporting traditions. From the riverbank looking up, you have a 45-degree arc. From directly opposite at 9 o'clock to directly above at 12 o'clock. This method of fly fishing is visual, very subtle and sometimes very difficult. There is no point in hammering the fish by repeatedly casting to them. You will make them more and more suspicious. Go find another fish. Always try and limit your footprint on the stream. The name of the game is precise casting and delicate presentation of the nymph at the fish's level. They will not move far. This is always very important to remember. This accurate cast, followed by a raising of the rod tip, lifting the nymph through the fish's line of sight, resulted in a gentle take from a good grayling. Reasonable sized grayling. That lovely big dorsal fin. It's a lovely grayling. Oh, very lively. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Superb, absolutely superb. Pleased with that. Took it very gently, just moved off the current, and I thought my nymph had drifted past him, but as I lifted it tightened, fish was there. Good. In nymph fishing for chalk stream trout, fishing across and upstream, the aim always is to catch targeted fish by stalking with your first presentation. It is not sporting to fish the water blind in the hope there might be a fish willing to take your offering. Aspire to deceive a targeted trout with very delicate, accurate casting so as little disturbance to the water as possible is caused to the other trout and grayling. They are easily spooked. Well, as I say, there's not much point in hammering these fish too much, because all you're going to do is just make them even more wary, and we need to go and find another fish in the hope that might be more amenable. But there's some lovely fish about. In this area of stream, within my casting range of about 20 metres, I am using an ultralight 3-weight outfit. There are roughly between 10 and 15 sizable brown trout. In fact, there are trout and grayling everywhere, but they are not all looking for food. This one was hungry and took the nymph with gusto. This is a very powerful fish. In this gin clear, shallow water of early autumn, any mistake on my part will send fish dashing off in every direction. As if by magic, they will just melt away. Playing this sizable fish with as much finesse as I can, I managed to guide it into the net. This fish is £4. This fish is £4. Oh, this fish is ours. Oh, perhaps not. Might be 3.5. Might be 3.5. That little micro nymph. Just in the top jaw. Superb. Superb Worldwide Priory brown trout here on the magnificent River Test. Let's put him back. Here's an active fish on the fin and looking out for food. There's a lunge forward. The fish opens its mouth and sucks the nymph in and spits it out again before I can react. In fact, I didn't even see it or feel it. It was so gentle. Here it is again in slow motion. The little white wink as the mouth opens, and you can see the line drawing away as I lift the rod away from the fish. There are 2 fish in this shot. Casting to the near one, I get no reaction. Casting again to the further one, I get an instant take of the nymph. There's the wink. That was the other fish, the other side. Lifting the rod to set the hook, the fish is on. Oh, lovely red spots. Beautiful red spots. Little nymph's out. Look at those red spots. Look at those red spots. Isn't that lovely? Oh. This is turning into one of those days again, which we call red letter ones. It's wonderful. It echoes Ray and I's day 2 years ago on this same stretch, where we had a very good day. The conditions are more or less the same. A little bit windier, which is making life trickier a little bit. Every now and again when you get these gusts, which blows the fly off course. But all in all, it's absolutely magnificent. And having a ball, having a ball. Well, it's soon be time for lunch. That was just so delicate. The fish just moved about 6 inches. I didn't see his mouth open because he was facing away from me. But I saw him just shake his head, and that was enough to tell me that the bottom had started to move. As I get a splash in the face. That's a lovely, lovely test brown. Just wet my hands. Look at the spots. Isn't that beautiful? Absolutely incredible. Lovely, lovely, strong, powerful fish, and you can just see the tiny little pheasant tail nymph embedded in his upper jaw. Let's slip him back. Just on the neb. That is superb. About 2¼ pounds. Let's find a nice place where I can slip him back. Be careful not to fall in, and just cradle him in a gentle current. When he's ready to go, he'll flick his tail and away he'll go. There he goes. There you are. Tiny little pheasant tail nymph. It's no more than about, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch long, but it's imitating the nymphs of the small spurwing and the pale watery olives that are hatching at the moment. It's not a big hatch, but where you're getting the nymphs drifting down on the way to the surface to hatch into the winged insect. The fish are really interested in taking them, so I'll continue to use this until conditions either change or the fish tell me that they might like something else. Anyway, that was very nice. Take time to study the stream before you commence operations. Let the river come to you. It will if you let it. It might tell you some of its secrets and moods. The river will talk to you. Be at one with it. Read it. What are the fish feeding on? It's no good throwing a dry fly to fish taking nymphs subsurface. And no good throwing sinking nymphs when fish are taking newly hatched floating insects. It's not rocket science, just common sense. I've just seen a fish over on the gravel over there. Just want to get set up. Strip some line off. Probably enough. Try and lay this nymph about 2 feet in front of the fish, and hopefully he'll take it. Here I'm not fishing the water, but casting to individual fish. Each cast is directed at different actively feeding fish. We now have another question to address. As the morning warms up, the sun is starting to burn away the overcast. Fish will become more difficult to approach in these brighter conditions. So I am lengthening the distance to the fish by another 4 or 5 yards. That should be enough to lower my profile to below the trout's angle of sight. This fish is nymphing, so give it what it wants, where it wants it. Over the gravel, deep. As soon as the sun comes out, they're just getting very wary. Very wary indeed. He's just drifting off. There's another fish over there. My line of sight, by that I mean my eyes, are always moving up and down and side to side, looking for the best view into the stream. In nymph fishing, you never look at the surface. Look through it to the stream bed. In your mind's eye, you should be in the water with the trout. Casting about 15 yards upstream and pitching accurately the size 20 micro nymph about 2 feet in front of the trout, the tiny nymph sinks down, dead drift, and in classic style the fish accepts my deception with alacrity. Wow, that's perfect. This is a good fish, I think. Here's that little underwater wink again in slow motion. A delicate cast and perfect presentation of the nymph fooled the trout completely. Can't quite reach. That was a stretch. Lovely fish, lovely fish. And that was the little fly that Ray has just given me. It's a size 20 micro nymph. It's tiny, only about 7mm long. Let me release this fish. Super. Get the line away from its flank. Lovely. Oh, it's gone straight away. That's a very good way to bring my Chalkstream Chronicles to a close. I have been very privileged to fish and film on these iconic streams and been fortunate to savour some other superb blue ribbon fly fishing in some breathtaking places around the world. I have only to say a big thank you to you, Mr. Marryat, for all that. He made me realise there is so much more to fishing than just catching fish. In the weeks and months after Marryat's death, some of his intimate fishing companions were inspired to remember him in the Field and Fishing Gazette. One of them penned an extensive and heartfelt tribute. This was Major W.G. Turle of Newton Stacey, an estate on the Upper Test I know very well, and where GSM was a regular house guest. The Major invented the Turle knot for attaching the new upper-eyed dry fly hooks to the fine-drawn silkworm gut casts. The Major wrote, Little did I think when he was here shooting a few months ago, brimful of vigour and life, that was the last time we would meet in this world. For if ever a man looked likely to enjoy a green old age, I should have said that man was Marryat. For 20 or more years, Marryat and his tam o' shanter were a regular institution on the Test, and great was the sorrow expressed by rich and poor when it is heard we should see him amongst us no more. A remarkable man, and one perhaps who has helped on dry fly fishing as much, if not more, than any other man during the latter half of the century. And Marryat's doings and Marryat's sayings will be remembered and repeated wherever the gentlecraft is known and practised in Great Britain, and possibly in many a distant colony besides. The Major was not wrong. I have returned to Salisbury today to pay my respects on this St. Valentine's Day, 120 years after the grief and disbelief that his passing caused all those years ago. Gone forever now, but never forgotten. It is 21 years since I found George Selwyn Marryat's final resting place here on the Garth, the ancient burial ground within the cloisters of this magnificent cathedral. I have been granted the rare privilege to tread on the Garth today, where I will pay my respects to him by laying a laurel wreath over his grave, repeating the occasion of his centenary in 1996. Sleep, cherished friend, secure from storm and wind. Thy life well acted, thy part well played. Where could Selwyn a fairer haven find than 'neath the spire in cloistered shade?